Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here at West 2018 in San Diego, California, the West Coast's largest maritime conference and trade show. The conference is co-sponsored by AFCEA International and the United States Naval Institute. Our coverage here is sponsored by Leonardo DRS. And we're honored to be talking to United States Marine Corps Lieutenant General Bob Walsh, who is the commander of the Marine Corps Combat Development Center, the intellectual home of the Marine Corps. Naval Academy graduate, 1979, F-4, F-18 pilot, and a whole bunch of things in between. Sir, great seeing you again.
Good. Thank you, Vago. Thanks for being here.
Enjoyed your talk, as everybody here did, when you were talking a little bit about the threat, the challenges, the new national security strategy. But you said that in many ways this harkens back to the first decade of your career, which was as a Cold War Marine, where there was a variety of missions that were on the Marine Corps' plate. And you showed a bit of footage of a Chinese military parade with modern English language announcers talking about the hardware that was in a base in Inner Mongolia. And talk to us a little bit about why you put that up for Marine Corps University students. What's the message you're trying to deliver in terms of, as you drove the message here, how the Marine Corps has to fundamentally think differently about the future?
The National Defense Strategy, I think, has given us very clear guidance on where we need to head. And it says we're moving away from terrorism, counterterrorism, and we're moving towards high-end competition against strategic competitors, namely Russia and China. As I look back at our Marines, you would have to kind of go back to Marines and sailors that have been around before 1990, really. The end of the Soviet Union, the fall of the Berlin Wall in '89. That really understood great power competition. That's not to say that in Desert Storm we didn't compete in conventional warfare. It wasn't counterinsurgency, but it wasn't high-end competition against a peer adversary that we had to continue like a chess game to see what they were doing, understand what they're doing, and try to compete and outpace them. You look at what we've been doing with these Marines today, and it really, I would argue, any of our Marine colonels and below, Navy captains, it's really probably only the senior colonels and Navy captains, generals and admirals that really were back in that area. So when the Secretary of Defense comes forward and says it's a great power competition, that this is where we're now focused on, that starts really driving into our concepts and really our exercises, our war games, our experiments, and where the force should head, where Marine Corps Force 2025 is going. As you look at that, I look at the generation, how do I get them to understand what we're talking about? I came in and grew up in that. We gradually knew it. You kind of slowly over time became part of that. How do we get them to understand that this is changing? When they go out to their pre-deployment exercise at an integrated training exercise out in 29 Palms to get certified before they deploy. What are we certifying them to? And it takes everybody in the force to really understand that what is great power competition. So I show that to the students so they can look at that, and it really is kind of eye-opening because, like I say, that's not what they saw in Iraq and Afghanistan against the Taliban, against ISIL, against Al-Qaeda in Iraq. They're very good with those threats. These are all strong warfighters, have been in combat most of their careers. But when you start talking about that end of it, it's a completely different scenario. I use that vignette also about how would we do in the scenario we saw in eastern Ukraine in those capabilities. I think it's the same thing there. How would our Marines operate in that environment? Now, what we did see with ISIL was starting to pick up more of the conventional capabilities, but still nothing like what you saw in that video. So the video really is like an attention getter for the young Marines, officer and enlisted, to start to see when the Secretary of Defense and the Commandant of the Marine Corps say we're moving in this new direction, it's a visual for them to go, wow, this is something completely I'm uncomfortable with. But we're going to get them comfortable with it.
Obviously it starts with the mass formation of tanks and then, brings up with the strategic nuclear forces. And that was great, the little section in the middle where they talk about disruptive command and control. Right. We want to disrupt the command and control capabilities of our adversary. Let me take you to the USS America ARG, 15th MU. We talked talked to J.R. Clearfield, who was the MU commander, about the deployment. And we talked to Rome Ruiz as well, who was the Commodore, and we talked to commanding officer of the ship, Captain Molson, about the deployment. First time out for this new aviation-centric ship. Its sister ship, the Tripoli, is in construction, although those are going to be the two aviation-centric ships. But this ARG operated in an extremely distributed manner. Pearl Harbor was in one place, San Diego was another, and America was somewhere else. Talk to us about this concept you've been developing now for a while for increasingly distributed operations where you can get mass effects over a much wider area, and how this plays into the intellectual experimentation and operational experimentation the Marine Corps is doing.
So distributed operations, I would say what we're doing at sea with the Navy, in distributed maritime operations, on being able to distribute, aggregate when necessary. So much of it depends on being able to share information, have a common operating picture, to operate under what we call the fleet tactical grid. And if our ships are able to connect into that network, and our Marines ashore, operating on shore sites or expeditionary bases that are tied into that mission of sea control or sea denial, we've got to be tied into that grid and be in that distributed network too. So much of it is being able to protect our center of gravity, which is our command and control, which is the sharing, distributing of information, and being able to command those forces. That's no different than really what we're doing on land that we saw with our Sea Dragon experimentation force with 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. If we could give them more capabilities and share more information with them down to the lowest level, it gave them the ability to spread out, distribute, cover more battle space, and be less targeted by a high-end threat than if they're all right together. Now, being distributed, if they've got the right information at the right time, they can aggregate at the right point of attack whenever we need to. And I think the follow-on piece of that we're working with the Navy real hard is how do we operate in degraded and denied environment. So people are going to attack our C2 network. We haven't really seen that done over in the Middle East. We're going to see it in the future going into the high-end threat based on the capabilities they have. But our challenge on the requirement side or the force development side is how do we develop capabilities that can stand in and operate in that degraded, denied environment, almost like a power grid system. When you lose a power plant, they quickly distribute information and power in ways that you don't even know it back home.
You were talking about innovation, and let me ask you this last question because I'm getting the hook here. But on innovation, you talked about the importance of it. You talked about bringing back Sea Dragon, for example, in order to start doing those kind of battle force experimentation. It's off to a good start. General Neller started that in 16, if I recall correctly. Yes. Talk to us a little bit about all of the mechanisms you're setting up to harvest some of these ideas and the process you're using to strain some of these ideas, because there are some people who look at this period as the interwar period, sadly. And in the last interwar period, when it was in between the wars, the Marine Corps was developing Higgins boats and amphibious concepts and a whole bunch of things that held it in good stead. I know you're not going to be specific on what some of the real break-ahead things are, but talk to us a little bit about that process you're using to harness the force, bring other people from outside. You talked about the reconnaissance vehicle you're interested in. You weren't satisfied with what you were getting from industry. You want them to think differently. Talk to us about how you're harnessing all these ideas.
From an experimentation standpoint of bringing the ideas, I think the one thing that I would say is I feel very lucky. I think the Marine Corps should be very lucky with what senior leaders did many years ago by organizing us the way we do. The ability to have the Marine Corps Warfighting Lab, I think that is a key place. When you talk Sea Dragon was birthed out of the Marine Corps Warfighting Lab. We are the only service that really has a warfighting lab. There's research labs, there's other institutions, but our warfighting lab, its whole ability or mission really is to take ideas, concepts, science and technology, experiments, and wargamings, and connect that with the operating forces. So you've got a place that's doing all that innovation, which is concepts, war games, experiments, science and technology. We put the Rapid Capabilities Office in there. But the key part is we can't do anything without the operating forces. They're the ones that are going to be our real testers and experimenters with us. So the process is to get those ideas down to the operating forces, make them part of it, and help them develop the force. Now, one of the things, you mentioned process, and a lot of people don't like to talk process, but one of the things that I find is to make us successful is being as transparent and open as we can. So one of the things that Brigadier General Workman does down at the Warfighting Lab, he has a monthly, quarterly integration forum with almost really just about every warfighting unit in the Marine Corps monthly. And he brings in across our 12 warfighting challenges. One warfighting challenge would be, for example, develop battle space awareness. And what we do is he goes through those monthly, and then quarterly I bring in all of the 3-stars across the Marine Corps, all of them, and we talk about what we've learned in 3 of the warfighting challenges. And a lot of it's not just what we've learned in experimentation, it's what we've learned on deployments, what they've learned in real missions, in combat. Bringing those back in and them have a voice into what we're doing and where we should be going. And from that, we roll that up into a future force implementation plan that goes to the commandant and the senior leaders that then say this is where we should go. And from that, I then turn it over to the Capabilities Development Directorate, and they now get into the requirements process and start working into the POM process. So transparency, I think, with the operating forces is it causes us to be an innovative force. People say the Marine Corps is an innovative force. They are, and I've got to be the one that can really facilitate that.
Sir, thanks so much. We really appreciate it and look forward to seeing you in Quanticoda talking a more strategic level.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, good. Thank you, Vago.